Today we are working on lesson 8.6, and you should have started by cutting out your centimeter cubes and your square pattern blocks and working on the math message on page 202. So there are two questions on page 202. We're going to review them right now because I think this is probably the first time that you are partitioning a rectangle. So this lesson is about partitioning. Partitioning means to break something up into equal parts. So we're going to take our rectangle here and we're going to break it up into equal parts, and each part will be the size of one of our centimeter cubes, or in your case, your little centimeter square that you printed out. So question 1. Use centimeter cubes to completely cover rectangle A without gaps or overlaps. So I want to make sure as I'm lining up my squares, there are no gaps or overlaps. I'm putting my squares in. Okay, so I have 4 there so far, but I'm noticing the way I have them lined up, there's some gaps between them. So I'm going to slide them over. Now I have room for more, but there's a problem. They're overlapping. They're on top of each other. So what you want to make sure is they're just lined up next to each other without any space between them, and they're not on top of each other. Okay, so that looks much better. So I have 4 so far, and I can tell I can fit one more. And I've made one row of centimeter squares. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares in this row. But I have to cover this entire rectangle. I have to break up the entire rectangle into equal parts, so I have to keep going. So I'm gonna just kind of use the row I already made and line up squares with that row. And remember, I'm trying not to have any overlap or any gaps. I'm doing the best I can here. All right. Now there are 5 more blocks in this row. So what you might have started to notice that in each row when you're partitioning, there should be the same number of centimeter squares. So by that logic, there should be 5 in this row. All right, so now my rectangle is covered, and so yours would have looked something like this, and then you should go ahead and answer the question. We'll do it together. How many rows of cubes are on rectangle A? So there is one row here, another row going this way, and another row going this way. There are 3 rows of cubes. So let's write that down. The answer is 3. How many cubes are in each row on rectangle A? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's double check each row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there should be the same number of cubes in each row. How many cubes did you use to cover rectangle A? Now there's a couple ways you could do this. You could count each of your cubes individually, or I notice that each row is 5, so I'm going to just count by 5s. 5, 10, 15. So there are 15 cubes that I used to cover my rectangle. Oops. Let's move that here. Okay, now rows go this way. And this doesn't ask you this, but let's just talk about it really quickly. When you go from top to bottom, what is that called? Anyone remember? They're called columns. So there are 5 columns in this rectangle. We're going to get to that later. Okay, now part 2 asks you to draw squares on rectangle B to show how you covered rectangle A with cubes. So I'm just going to move my cubes off and show you how I might draw those cubes on there. And I'm thinking if I were you at home, I might have kept one of my cubes just to kind of make sure I was lining everything up. So let's draw. I'm going to break up into, this is one row, and I'm going to move my cube down. This is another row, because I remember I had 3 rows. So now I have my 3 rows, and I need to put my 5 squares in each row. So I'm going to bring my square back up here, and I'm going to draw a column down. And then I'm going to move my square over. And maybe you did this a different way, but I'm just showing you one of my strategies. Move it over. Maybe you were able to picture where each of your lines should go because you knew about the size of the cube, and that's okay too. And this is just the strategy that I'm choosing to use when I have my one block. All right, so let's check that I did it correctly. I need to have 3 rows, 1, 2, 3, and I need to have 5 cubes in each row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I need to have 15 cubes total, 5, 10, 15. Okay, on partitioning a rectangle using the yellow centimeter cubes, but now we want to talk about partitioning a rectangle into squares using a square pattern block. So my square pattern block is orange. The square pattern blocks that you would have printed are just white. So the centimeter ones are the small yellow ones. And for this part, we're going to use the white ones. So let's talk about how we might do this. Now, in the last question, we had 20 small centimeter cubes and we could fill up our whole shape and see what they looked like. But now we only have one square pattern block to use to figure out how many are going to fit. So let's check it out. Partition each rectangle into squares that are the same size as a square pattern block. So we have that here. You may use a pattern block to help you. So it's telling me I can only use one pattern block. So I want to think to myself, how many square pattern blocks are going to fit inside this rectangle? And as I place this one square here, I can very quickly see that one more will fit under it. So how many rows of squares am I going to have? That's right, 2. So first and foremost, I'm going to take my line. I'm going to line up my square pattern block. And I'm going to break my rectangle into 2 rows because I could quickly see that 2 rows would fit. And now I'm wanting to figure out how many blocks are going to fit in each row. So there's a couple ways you could do this. Maybe you take it and kind of eyeball. That's about 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6. So I eyeballed it, but I'm not exactly sure. Maybe you want to take your square pattern block and make a column. So that works. Whoop, it's not really straight. Let me try to make it a little more straight. Okay. Maybe you want to take your square pattern block, and as you do this, just sort of mark where your lines should go. So there could be one here. There could be one here. There could be one that fits here. There could be one here. And it looks like one more will fit here. So you could use those markers to then show you where you should go in and put your columns or your lines. You could also do that with your finger and draw as you go. I can't really put my finger on the computer screen, but sometimes people like to just use their finger as a marker to show where it would go. And then you want to go back and check. And now I'm just doing this sort of freehand on the computer, so it's not perfect, but it would be a great idea for you to use a ruler or a straight edge to make sure you are drawing straight lines. That would really help you make sure that you are partitioning your rectangle into equal sized parts with straight lines. So I think this looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and answer the questions. Oops. So question 1 says, how many rows? Now rows go this way. So I can already see that I have 2 rows. I partitioned this rectangle into 2 rows. How many squares are in each row? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what that really means is how many squares fit in each row of all the same size and equally. So I wouldn't want to have 6 squares in this row and 8 squares in this row. That wouldn't work. When I'm partitioning, I'm making them all equal parts. So every row is the same size and each column is the same size, so there should be the same number of blocks in each row. How many squares are there in all? Now, there's a couple ways I could count. I could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Or I could say these are doubles. So this row of 6 plus this row of 6 is 12. 6 plus 6 is 12. So I can add that in more than one way. So today, what you're going to be working on is partitioning rectangles using your square pattern block. So what I'd like you to do is to continue working on page 203 and 204 in your math journal. And when you finish those, move on to page 205 math boxes as a review. Have a good day.